There was a time when one company didn't just build bicycles, it defined them. A brand so iconic that in some places people didn't say, "I bought a bike." They said, "I bought a Raleigh." From a tiny workshop on a back street in Nottingham, Raleigh rose to become the largest bicycle manufacturer in the world, shaping cities, childhoods, and even professional racing. And then, slowly the world changed. Cars took over the roads, factories moved across oceans, and the company that once symbolized British cycling glory became just one name among many in the global marketplace. This is the story of the rise and fall of Raleigh, and what its journey tells us about technology, globalization, and how even giants can fade. Let's begin. Our story begins in 1885 in Nottingham. Two mechanics, Richard Morris Woodhead and Paul Eugene Louis Angois, set up a small bicycle workshop on Raleigh Street. It was just another little Victorian workshop at first, but the bikes they made began to get noticed. By around 1887, they were advertising a model called simply the Raleigh. Then, in 1888, everything changed. A British lawyer named Frank Bowden walked into their world. He bought one of their bikes, liked it very much, and saw so much potential in it that he decided not just to become a customer, but an owner, eventually buying out the original investors and reorganize it as the Raleigh Cycle Company. The roles were clear. Angois focused on design, Woodhead ran the workshops, and Bowden became chairman and managing director, the driving force behind expansion. Under Bowden, things moved fast. By 1891, Raleigh already occupied several factories around Nottingham. By mid-1890s, it had grown into the world's largest bicycle manufacturer, with a 7.5-acre factory on Faraday Road. Imagine that in less than a decade, a little backstreet workshop turned into a Victorian mega factory, fuming with innovation and ambition. But Raleigh didn't stop at size. It went after technology. In 1902, the company acquired Sturmey Archer, a name that would become legendary for its 3-speed hub gears. This wasn't just another component, it changed cycling. Riders could enjoy smoother, more practical gear shifting without the complexity of exposed derailleur systems, a huge advantage for everyday cyclists. By the early 20th century, Raleigh was producing bicycles in enormous numbers. The brand was becoming globally known. Under Frank Bowden, and later his son Sir Harold Bowden, Raleigh didn't just build its own bikes. It acquired other bicycle makers and diversified. By the 1930s, the company owned several well-known component and bike brands, and Raleigh wasn't afraid to experiment. In the 1930s, it even tried its hand at motorized vehicles, building some motorcycles and a small car known as the Safety 7, as well as motorized tricycles. These ventures were short-lived, but they show how ambitious the company had become. By 1930, Raleigh had firmly secured its status as the largest bicycle manufacturing company in the world. It survived the upheaval of the First World War, and in the interwar years, under Harold Bowden in the 1920s and 1930s, it continued to grow and consolidate its dominance. In many countries, Raleigh became almost synonymous with bicycle. And in Nottingham, the factories employed a huge workforce, turning the company into a major source of local pride and economic life for the city. When the Second World War broke out, Raleigh's world changed again. Bicycle production took a back seat as the Nottingham factory shifted to war effort, making items such as fuzzes and other war-related components. Cycle output dropped, but Raleigh survived the war. Then, after 1945, a new threat appeared. Not a competitor, but a change in how people moved. Car ownership began to rise sharply. Across Britain and much of the developed world, bicycles, once the default mode of transport, became less essential. Demand for everyday utility bikes shrunk. The entire British bicycle industry, including Raleigh, had to face a new reality. To adapt, Raleigh doubled down on consolidation and integration. By the 1950s and 1960s, it had merged with or acquired a range of firms. Component makers such as Brooks, famous for leather saddles, and of course Sturmey Archer for hubs. It also benefited from the tubing technology via the Reynolds Tube Company, whose butted steel tubing underpinned many high-quality frames. A big turning point came in 1960, when Raleigh itself was acquired by Tube Investments, TI. The new entity, TI Raleigh, sat inside a wider industrial group that also owned Reynolds. At one point, this enlarged organization controlled around 75% of the UK bicycle market. On paper, it was the perfect vertically integrated empire. Tubing, components, frames, assembly, all under one umbrella. Even as everyday cycling declined, Raleigh found powerful new ways to stay in the spotlight. In 1969, the company launched a bike that would define an era of childhood, the Raleigh Chopper. With its radical motorcycle-inspired design, small front wheel, large rear wheel, long seat, tall backrest, and ape-hanger handlebars, the Chopper captured the imagination of kids worldwide. It sold in the millions and has gone down as the true design classic. The 1970s brought more hits, like the Raleigh Grifter and the other youth-orientated toy cycle models, cementing the brand's place in the family and children's markets, not just amongst serious cyclists. In the 1980s, Raleigh continued to make its mark in professional cycling. Through the TI Raleigh racing team, the brand competed at the very highest level. A defining moment came in 1980, when Dutch rider Joop Zoetemelk won the Tour de France on a TI Raleigh bike. A major symbolic victory that proved Raleigh still mattered in elite racing. The company also embraced the emerging BMX boom. The Raleigh Burner series became massively popular, with over 1 million units sold. And Raleigh sponsored BMX riders and teams, plugging directly into youth and urban bike culture. These models kept Raleigh in the public eye and helped counterbalance the broader decline in everyday cycling. But under the surface, deeper problems were forming. The forces that would eventually bring Raleigh down had been building for decades. From the 1950s onward, rising car ownership had steadily reduced reliance on bicycles for commuting and leisure. Demand for standard adult bikes shrunk. At the same time, the global bicycle industry was evolving. Manufacturers in Japan, Taiwan, and elsewhere began producing high-quality bikes at lower costs. Traditional British makers, Raleigh included, struggled to compete with these imports. There were also technological shifts. For years, Raleigh's internal hub gears, especially through Sturmey Archer, had led the way. But as derailleur gears improved and spread, often driven by foreign component makers like Shimano, Raleigh's older model of hub-based gearing seemed increasingly outdated and less competitive. Internally, the company was weighed down by its vertically integrated model, large factories, in-house parts manufacturing, and a big workforce. This model had once been a strength. Now, as the global market shifted to leaner, outsourced production, it became a structural disadvantage. By 1981, foreign competitors held around 36% of the British cycle market, while Raleigh's share has slipped to about 45%. The workforce, once roughly 7,500 strong, had fallen to around 4,000 as production was cut and costs trimmed. It was becoming clear that the old Raleigh model was unsustainable. In 1987, after years of falling market share and financial pressure, the TI Raleigh Group was sold to Derby Cycle, also known as Derby International. Under Derby and later owners, the logic of globalization intensified. Production moved increasingly overseas. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, many frames and components were being sourced from Asia rather than made in Nottingham. A huge symbolic moment came in 1999, when Raleigh closed its Nottingham frame-making plant. The company that had once prided itself on building its own frames in its home city was now outsourcing that core part of its identity. By the end of 2002, all UK assembly had ceased. Raleigh announced that 116 years of bike building in Nottingham would come to an end. Production would now take place overseas. In Britain, Raleigh would focus on distribution and design. At around the same time, key components brands long associated with Raleigh, such as Sturmey Archer and Brooks, were sold off or separated from the company. By the early 2000s, Raleigh had effectively transformed from a British manufacturing powerhouse into largely a brand name, with manufacturing outsourced and its traditional vertically integrated structure dismantled. Raleigh's story didn't end there. In 2012, the company was acquired by Dutch Axel Group, a major European bicycle conglomerate owning several brands across the continent. The idea was to place Raleigh inside a broader international portfolio, sharing technology, distribution, and especially capitalizing on trends like e-bikes. The brand also tapped into nostalgia. In 2004, Raleigh relaunched the Chopper, aimed at those who remember it fondly and a new generation curious about retro design. But the new century brought new challenges. By 2023 and 2024, Raleigh UK was again in serious financial trouble. Newly released accounts showed losses of over £30 million in 2023, on top of a loss of around £6.8 million in 2022. Company leadership pointed to a familiar issue across the bike industry: overstocking after post-COVID cycling boom, combined with price pressure as demand fell back to more normal levels. So although Raleigh continues to design and sell bicycles today, the business is a far cry from the Nottingham giant it once was. Looking back over more than a century, Raleigh's decline wasn't a single disaster. It was a slow, complex unraveling. Several forces came together. First, market changes. As cars became more affordable and widespread, many people stopped using bicycles as everyday transport. Second, global competition and outsourcing. Manufacturers in Asia were able to produce bikes more cheaply, and their quality improved steadily. Traditional British factories with higher labour and overhead costs struggled to compete. Third, Raleigh clung to a rigid, outdated industrial model. Its vertically integrated large factory system, once a strength, became a liability in a world that increasingly favoured flexible, outsourced production. Fourth, brand illusion and the loss of the Made in Britain mystique. As production moved overseas and factories in Nottingham closed, Raleigh became to many just another global brand, stripped of the industrial heritage that had once made it unique. And finally, structural and financial pressures. Shrinking domestic market share, a reduced workforce, inability to fulfill modernized supply chains, a series of ownership changes, and in recent years heavy financial losses. Add all of this together and you don't get a sudden crash. You get a long, slow decline. So what's left of Raleigh today? The name still exists as part of the Axel Group, and Raleigh continues to sell bikes worldwide. But the reality is simple. Raleigh no longer manufactures bicycles in Nottingham. The old factories are gone. Its role on the global bike industry is a shadow of its former dominance. Recent financial struggles, like the roughly $30 million loss in 2023, show that even under modern global ownership, Raleigh is still fighting for its place. And yet, this story isn't just about decline. Raleigh's history captures something bigger: how industries change, how technologies come and go, and how icons are made and unmade. From the Chopper and the Burner, to the 3-speed hub and the Tour de France victory, Raleigh left an imprint on cycling culture that can't simply be measured in balance sheets. The rise and fall of Raleigh is the story of a company that helped get the world moving on two wheels, and then had to watch as the world moved on without it. A golden age of innovation and dominance, followed by decades of slow erosion under the forces of globalization and change. But every time you see an old Raleigh in a shed, a Chopper in a collection, or a 3-speed hub still ticking along, you're seeing more than just a bike. You're seeing a fragment of industrial history, and a reminder that even giants begin in small workshops on quiet streets.